The judge's gavel came down hard, the sound echoing like a gunshot across the small-town courtroom. Dust drifted in the afternoon light that cut through the high windows, and the murmurs of the townsfolk quieted to nothing. Every eye fixed on her, she stood at the front, hands clasped tightly, trying not to show the tremor in her chest. The verdict had been given. She was ordered to marry, not by choice, not by love, but by decree, and the man she would choose could shape her future as much. As the barren land stretched across the horizon, the town had grown restless over her case. A woman alone, carrying more burden than fortune, had no place in the hard-boned rules of frontier life. Survival demanded ties, a home built not by one, but by two. And so the judge's sentence was final. She must take a husband, and she must do it now. The thought twisted inside her marriage not as a promise of devotion, but as punishment, as law. Yet in the heavy silence of that courtroom, she raised her chin against the shame. Among the men gathered, some stood stiff and eager, their eyes glinting with ambition. Ranchers looking for land, widowers seeking a wife to tend to their children, drifters sniffing after a chance at respectability. She knew their kind, and their offers tasted of iron chains. They were strangers, all of them, and the weight of binding herself to one made her skin prickle. But then her gaze shifted to the far corner, where shadows clung to a figure that didn't belong to law or town or church. He leaned against the wall as though the place amused him, dust on his boots and danger in his eyes. His hat tipped low, but not enough to hide the faint smirk tugging at his mouth. The outlaw. Every whisper in town had named him trouble. Sort of trouble that left a trail of broken fences, missing horses, and wounded pride. He was the kind of man mothers warned their daughters about. The kind who carried the wilderness in his bones and sin in his stare. And when her eyes met his, she felt her heart stumble. The judge's words still hung heavy in the air, pressing her to decide. She could pick a man who might keep her fed but grind her spirit into dust, or she could choose the one who looked like sin on a saddle. A man who might ruin her but never bore her. Her throat went dry as her mind raced with memories of nights alone, fighting the wind that shook the shutters of mornings spent working fields until her hands bled. Of the gnawing ache of loneliness that no law could soften. She thought of what safety meant out here. Safety was a word stretched thin in a land of rattlesnakes and rifles. Safety was a fence post that could be kicked down by cattle, or a promise that could rot before winter passed. Maybe safety was never meant for her. Maybe fire was. And he stood there, fire bound into human form, daring her to step closer. The townsfolk whispered. Some leaned forward, eager to see her fail. Others shook their heads, already branding her a fool. She could feel the weight of their judgment pressing on her back, but her decision was hers alone, and she would not let them see her falter. The outlaw straightened, his eyes narrowing as though he could sense her wavering. There was no plea in his gaze, no kindness either. Just a challenge, a silent question. If she picked him, she'd be stepping into a storm. If she didn't, she'd be shackled to the ordinary, to a life that wasn't hers. Her lips parted, her heart pounding, and the words teetered at the edge of her tongue. The judge cleared his throat, impatient. The men shuffled, the silence stretching tight as a noose. The smell of sweat and dust filled the room, and even the floorboards seemed to creak under the weight of her decision. She looked once more at the outlaw, his smirk daring her to leap into ruin. Then she looked at the safe choices men with steady hands but empty eyes. Her chest rose with a sharp breath, and she felt her voice break free, but before the words left her mouth, a sudden clap of thunder split the sky outside. The windows rattled, and the horses tied along the hitching posts shrieked and pulled at their reins. The storm was coming fast, heavy and unyielding. Just like the choice that stood before her, the judge leaned forward, voice low but firm. "Your husband, girl? Speak it now." Her hands tightened, her pulse quickened, and her gaze locked with the man who looked like sin carved in human form. The outlaw tipped his head, the faintest flicker of a smile tracing his lips, as though he already knew her answer, and with the storm rolling closer, she opened her mouth to choose only. The next sound wasn't her voice. It was the sharp bang of the courthouse doors slamming open, the gust of wind scattering papers, and a stranger's shadow falling across the floor. The townsfolk gasped, and for a heartbeat all eyes shifted. Her words caught in her throat. The outlaw didn't move, his expression unreadable. The judge's gavel struck once more, louder than thunder. Choose, or the choice will be made for you. The storm outside roared against the walls, and her heart hammered with the weight of a future that could break her or set her free. And in that moment, between the outlaw's smirk and the stranger's shadow, she realized her life would never again be her own. Would she choose the outlaw? Looked like sin on a saddle, or would fate snatch the decision from her trembling lips? The courtroom held its breath. It's waiting. The stranger's shadow stretched long across the wooden floor, the doors banging shut behind him with the weight of the storm. Rain had not yet fallen, but the wind howled against the courthouse walls as though it were trying to force its way in. Every face in the room turned to the newcomer, and even the judge paused with his gavel raised. Dust clung to the man's coat, and his boots struck the floor with the heavy sound of someone who had ridden hard without rest. He said nothing, only lifted his head, and for a brief moment his eyes met hers before sweeping the room with a look that carried both authority and danger. The outlaw did not flinch. He remained against the wall, his smirk flickering as if the storm and the stranger were only part of the show. But the woman felt her chest tighten. The world had narrowed to this moment, with two storms colliding, one outside, rattling the town, and another inside these four walls, rattling her fate. The judge's hand trembled on the gavel before he let it fall back to the desk with a thud. "This is no place for interruptions," the judge barked, though his voice lacked its usual bite. "State your business, or leave us be." The stranger tipped his hat, his voice calm but steady. "Business with the lady." His words cut through the silence like a knife. The townsfolk leaned forward, whispers circling. Who was he? What claim did he have? Her throat burned as though she had swallowed fire. The room blurred in her mind faces of men she had never wanted. The outlaw who dared her to choose him, and now this figure who carried mystery in every step. She had been ordered to pick a husband, but the choices seemed to multiply, each one pulling her in a different direction. The judge's patience snapped. This is no parade ground. She will choose now. The law does not wait for storms or strangers. She felt her knees weaken. The law. Always the law, pressing her down, boxing her in. The law had stolen her father's land with the stroke of a pen. The law had left her mother begging for mercy in a town that offered none. And now it ordered her to bind her life to a man she barely knew. But beneath her fear, something spark, anger, defiance, maybe even a kind of wild hope. She had been told she was powerless, yet all these men stood here waiting on her word. The outlaw stepped forward at last, the lazy grin gone from his face. His eyes burned with something sharper, something that made the room colder. If she must choose, he drawled, his voice low but steady, then let her choose without interruptions. His gaze locked on the stranger. It's like a gun drawn in silence. The stranger didn't move. Didn't blink, but the air between the two men grew taut as a rope pulled too tight. The crowd shifted, murmurs swelling again, the tension alive and crackling. The woman's heart pounded so loud she thought everyone must hear it. The judge slammed his gavel once more. Enough, girl. This court will have its answer. Say the name of the man you'll take, or I'll set it for you. Her lips parted, the words trembling just behind them. But her mind slipped backward before they could leave. Back to the days before the courthouse, before the judgment, before the world closed in on her. She had been born into dust and wind. Her father carving a life out of soil that never gave enough. Their cabin sat low against the land, the fence line stretching so far it seemed to vanish into the horizon. She remembered nights when coyotes howled and mornings when frost clung to the earth. Yet her father's laugh still found a way to break the silence. He had taught her how to ride before she could walk steady, had placed a rifle in her hands before she reached her teens. Out here, strength ain't a choice, he used to say. It's survival. But strength hadn't been enough to keep sickness from taking him. The land, stripped and battered, had been swallowed by debts no working hands could pay. She watched as men in pressed coats rode up with papers in hand, their horses fat and their words cold. Her mother had begged, but law never bent for the poor. By the time her father was laid in the ground, the land was gone, leaving only the cabin and the whispers of neighbors who said a woman alone couldn't last a winter. She had tried. Lord, she had tried. The fields, the animals, the endless work. But every effort had been a losing battle. And now she stood here, told by the same law that had stolen everything, that she must give away her freedom too. Her gaze drifted back to the outlaw. She didn't know his name, only the stories. He had ridden through towns like a shadow, they said, leaving trouble wherever he passed. Some called him a thief, others a killer, but all agreed he lived beyond the reach of the law. He wasn't safe, wasn't steady. He was wild as the storm beating at the windows, and yet when she looked at him, something inside her whispered that he was the only one who would never cage her. The stranger was still watching her, his presence stirring more questions than answers. His clothes were worn but not ragged, his face marked by travel but not hardened like the outlaw's. There was something in his eyes that unsettled her, a quiet claim she couldn't place. The judge's voice thundered again, snapping her from the weight of her thoughts. "Speak it now, girl. The law will not wait." Her chest heaved, breath caught between choices, between past and future. Around her the crowd leaned forward, every man's hand itching for the outcome. Her hands trembled, and she pressed them together to hide it. Though she knew the outlaw's eyes had already seen, she thought of her father's words, of the endless horizon that had always called to her. She thought of nights alone by the fire, when loneliness felt sharper than any blade. She thought of chains, both visible and hidden, and of the fire that flickered inside her chest, begging to burn free. The storm outside cracked with the first streak of lightning. The sky split open in fury. The courthouse windows shuddered, the air thick with the scent of rain. The moment stretched thin, each second a thread ready to snap. Her lips finally parted, the sound breaking into the silence. But before the name left her tongue, the stranger stepped closer, his voice calm but firm. "If she must choose," he said, "she deserves to know what each man hides." Gasps rippled through the room. The outlaw's jaw tightened, his hand brushing the edge of his coat where a weapon surely waited. The judge scowled, but the stranger pressed on, his gaze steady on her. Choices made in the dark lead only to chains. Her heart stuttered. What did he know? What secrets did he mean? The outlaw didn't move, though his silence spoke louder than any threat. The storm outside grew wild, the wind rattling the door as if the land itself waited for her answer. She stood caught between the outlaw's fire, the stranger's shadow, and the cold decree of the judge. Her voice trembled when she finally whispered, "Then tell me." The outlaw's eyes darkened, his smirk gone, replaced by something raw. The stranger held her gaze, his lips parting to speak, but the judge's gavel came down like a hammer on stone. No more delays. Her choice must be spoken now. The storm roared. The outlaw's stare burned. The stranger's shadow loomed, and her heart beat against her ribs, as if it already knew that no matter what name passed her lips, her life would never again belong to her alone. The moment held sharp and merciless, waiting for the breath that would break it. The storm outside beat harder against the wooden walls, as though nature itself demanded an answer. The woman's voice hovered on the edge of choice, yet silence hung heavier than the judge's gavel. The outlaw stood as steady as stone, his dark gaze never breaking from hers. The stranger's shadow loomed, holding secrets that burned at the edges of her curiosity. And the townsfolk pressed closer, their whispers slithering through the room like dry leaves in the wind. The judge, red-faced and restless, leaned forward. "This court cannot be held hostage by hesitation. Speak. Girl." His hand tightened on the gavel as if it were the only power he could cling to. Her chest rose with a sharp breath. But even as her lips began to form a name, thunder cracked above, drowning her words. In that instant, the outlaw shifted, his boots striking the floor as he stepped into the open. His presence filled the space, the smirk gone, his voice carrying a weight that silenced even the judge. "You force her into this," he said, his tone calm but edged with steel. "But a marriage born under the hammer of law is no marriage at all. You know it?" And so does every man in this room. Gasps rose. The outlaw had challenged the court itself, something no one dared. But instead of fear, the woman felt a strange pull in her chest. His words, reckless and sharp, carried a truth no one else would speak. The judge slammed the gavel again. Quiet yourself. You're no better than a vagrant, and your words weigh nothing here. The outlaw's jaw flexed. He said nothing, but the way his hand hovered near his belt carried a promise. The stranger stepped forward, his calm voice cutting through the storm of tempers. She deserves the truth of what lies before her. Every man here hides something. Some hide debts. Some hide wives in other towns. Some hide violence they'll bring to her door. He turned his gaze to the outlaw. And some hide blood that stains more than their hands. The woman's pulse raced. She felt the weight of every eye on her, yet it was the stranger's words that shook her most. What did he know of the outlaw's past? What did he know of hers? The questions clawed at her, but before she could speak, the outlaw's voice rolled low. You talk of blood, stranger, but you ride in with dust on your boots and secrets in your coat. If you mean to speak, then spit it out. Otherwise, quit circling like a wolf at dusk. The stranger didn't flinch. His gaze flicked to the woman, steady and quiet. You'll learn soon enough. But no, this you're not the only one chained to law's decree. Some chains are written on paper. Others are written in blood. The judge's patience tore like dry rope. He stood, pointing the gavel at her as though it were a weapon. The next sound from your lips will be the name of your husband. No more storms, no more speeches. Choose. The townsfolk murmured louder now. Some were eager to see her shackled. Some whispered warnings about the outlaw's temper. Others leaned into the mystery of the stranger, their curiosity sharpened to a blade. But all were united in their hunger for a decision that was not theirs to bear. Her breath came shallow, her hands trembling. She had never felt so trapped, yet never so awake. The outlaw's eyes burned into hers, not pleading, not soft, but daring her still. The stranger stood steady, carrying the kind of calm that came not from peace, but from resolve. The judge's glare seared through her, a reminder that law would crush her if she did not bend. Her mind spun. If she chose the outlaw, she would step into fire. If she chose another, she would chain herself to a life that was not her own. And if she refused altogether, the law would claim her fate anyway. The storm struck harder. Rain beginning to lash the windows. The courthouse seemed to groan under the weight of it, the candles flickering. For a fleeting moment, she thought the building itself might collapse before she spoke the name. Her lips parted, ready to release the choice when the sound of hooves split through the storm outside. Shouts rose in the distance. The doors rattled again, but this time no stranger stepped through. Instead, a deputy stumbled inside, dripping rain, his voice ragged with urgency. Raiders, he gasped. They're cumin fast, ridin' hard. Guns and fire with 'em. Panic swept the room. The crowd erupted, men rushing to the windows, mothers clutching children, the old judge paling as his gavel slipped from his hand. The storm outside was no longer the only threat. The land itself carried danger to their door. The outlaw's gaze sharpened, his smirk returning faintly as though chaos was the air he breathed. The stranger's eyes flicked toward the window, measuring the distance of danger without a flicker of fear. And the woman felt her heart slam as the world shifted again. Her choice suspended in the storm of greater peril. The judge shouted for order, but no one listened. The townsfolk were already moving, some toward the armory, some toward their families, some simply running. The deputy's words spread like fire raiders with torches, raiders who took what they pleased, raiders who left nothing but ruin behind. Her chest heaved. Marriage, law, choices, all seemed small in the face of fire and gunpowder. Yet she knew in her bones that this, too, was tied to her fate. For the outlaw looked at her not with defiance now, but with expectation. As though her decision was the hinge on which all else would turn, the stranger moved closer, his voice low. Your choice binds you to more than a name. Pick wrong, and when the smoke clears, you may not live to regret it. Her knees weakened, but she held his gaze. And if I pick right, the stranger's eyes softened only a fraction, then you'll have more than survival. You'll have a chance at freedom." The outlaw gave a low laugh, the sound rough and sharp. "Freedom ain't given, girl. It's taken. And I'm the only one in this room who knows how to take it," the storm roared. The townsfolk shouted, and the judge's voice cracked with desperation. The woman stood in the eye of it all, caught between the outlaw's fire, the stranger's shadow, and the pounding of hooves drawing closer by the second. Her heart burned with fear and defiance. She could not yet speak her choice, not with raiders bearing down and secrets bleeding into every corner. But she knew this whatever path she took. She was stepping into a world that would not let her walk away untouched. The courthouse shook as thunder split the sky. The outlaw's hand brushed the grip of his weapon. The stranger's boots shifted into a stance of readiness, and the judge clutched his robe as though it could shield him, and she stood between them all, her life hanging on the edge of a decision that would either save her or break her. Outside, the raiders' cries rose, carried by the storm. Inside, the silence before the storm of men and bullets grew thick enough to choke. Her lips parted once more, a whisper trembling free. But whether it was the name of a husband or the cry of someone ready to fight, the storm outside swallowed her words before anyone could hear. The courthouse doors shuddered, the candles sputtered, and all at once, the world seemed to hold its breath. The wind howled through the cracks of the courthouse as the pounding of hooves drew nearer. Every face inside turned pale, the whispers fading to silence as fear took its grip. The outlaw shifted his weight, one hand hovering near the pistol at his side, his eyes fixed on the rattling doors, as if he could see through them into the storm. The stranger stood just as steady, though his stillness carried a different kind of danger. He looked ready, but not reckless. The judge, meanwhile, stumbled back into his chair, his gavel forgotten, sweat beating across his forehead as though the law itself had fled him. The woman's pulse hammered, her hands cold against the fabric of her dress. She had been ordered to marry, ordered to speak a name, but now the threat outside made every choice heavier. Her decision would no longer only bind her future, it might decide whether she lived. Through the night at all, shouts rang from outside. The deputy's voice cracked with panic as he urged townsfolk to arm themselves. The scrape of benches echoed as men rushed to gather rifles from the back room. Women clutched their children, eyes darting to the windows where flashes of torchlight glimmered through sheets of rain. The storm itself seemed to tremble beneath the roar of raiders closing in. The outlaw leaned closer, his voice a low growl meant only for her. "You want safety. You won't find it with men who hide behind paper law. You want a chance to survive this night? You'll need me." Her throat tightened. His words burned with arrogance, yet they carried the edge of truth. He was dangerous, yes, but danger might be the only shield strong enough to face what thundered toward them now. The stranger took a step forward, his voice steady. "He'd drag you into fire and call it freedom. But there's more to surviving than shooting faster than the next man. You'll need more than his fire to outlast what's coming." The outlaw shot him a glare sharp enough to cut. But the stranger did not flinch. The woman felt the weight of both men pressing on her, their words like the storm's lightning striking on either side. One promised fire, the other a shadow of secrets. Both promised survival. Neither promised peace. The courthouse doors shook under the force of fists or boots outside. The room shuddered with each blow, and gasps rose from the crowd. The judge tried to bark orders, but his voice cracked, drowned out by the chaos. The outlaw smirked faintly, as if the danger thrilled him, while the stranger's eyes never left the woman's face, as though her choice mattered more than the raiders themselves. "Time's run out," the outlaw muttered. "Speak the name, girl, or the raiders'll tear this place apart before law ever can." She opened her mouth, but her words stuck in her throat. Fear pressed heavy, but beneath it, something else stirred. Defiance. She had been pushed and pressed, told what to do, what to say, what to choose. But tonight, her choice wasn't only about law or marriage. It was about who she would become when the storm passed. The first shot rang out outside, sharp and cracking through the storm. Screams followed. The townsfolk shrieked as smoke drifted in through the cracks of the door. The raiders had set fire to something close. The air thickened, the sound of gunfire mixing with the thunder overhead. The deputy staggered back into the room, his face streaked with rain and soot. "They're here," he rasped. "Torches, rifles, 20 or more. We won't hold 'em long." Panic erupted fully now. Mothers wept, children clung tighter, men cursed and fumbled with rifles that shook in their hands. The judge shouted for calm, but his words carried no strength. The outlaw's pistol was already drawn, the gleam of it catching the candlelight. He turned to the woman, his voice cutting through the noise. "Choose me, and you'll live to see morning." The stranger stepped closer, his own weapon still holstered, but his eyes fierce. "Choose him, and you may live through the night, but you'll trade one set of chains for another. Choose wisely, or you'll regret it with every breath you take after this storm." Her knees trembled, but she lifted her chin. The room spun with smoke and fear, the world narrowing to the outlaw's fire, the stranger's calm, and the pounding of raiders battering the doors. A crash split the room, the windows shattered as firelit arrows streaked inside. Flames licked at the curtains, sending sparks across the floor. The crowd shrieked, scattering. The outlaw cursed, firing a shot through the broken window. A cry rang outside as someone fell. The stranger moved swiftly, pulling down the burning fabric before it could spread. His hands were steady, efficient, as if he had faced storms like this before. He glanced at her, his face hard but his eyes carrying something more, something that made her chest tighten. The judge finally broke, stumbling back toward the exit, muttering about saving himself. The townsfolk's faith in law had crumbled, leaving only fear and smoke behind. The woman saw it then, clear as day. Law was nothing but wood and ink, powerless against fire and steel. The true power lay in those who dared to stand, not those who sat behind a desk. The outlaw's voice rang over the chaos. "Say it now, girl, before the raiders break through. Say my name, and I'll cut a path out of here." The stranger's voice followed, steady, unshaken. "Or say mine, and I'll stand with you. Not only tonight, but when the dust settles. Choose with your eyes open." Her breath came sharp, her heart slamming against her ribs. She saw the outlaw's fire, fierce and consuming, promising survival, but burning everything in its path. She saw the stranger's shadow, steady and quiet, hiding secrets but offering something stronger than fire. And she saw herself caught between law's hammer and the storm's fury, forced to choose not only a man but the kind of life she would live. The raiders' shouts grew louder, their boots pounding closer. The doors shuddered again, the wood splintering under their assault. Smoke curled thicker, choking the air. The outlaw's pistol fired once more. The stranger's hands tightened at his side, and the townsfolk screamed as the courthouse seemed ready to fall. Her lips parted, her choice trembling on the edge of sound. The outlaw's smirk widened, certain she would leap into his fire. The stranger's gaze held hers, patient but unyielding, certain she would see the truth in his shadow. The judge cowered in the corner, forgotten. As the law itself burned with the curtains, the storm outside howled. The raiders roared, and the world narrowed to this breath. This word, this moment. Her voice rose, carried by fear and fire. But the sound was swallowed by the crash of the courthouse doors bursting open. Raiders flooded inside, torches blazing, rifles raised. Their faces twisted with greed and hunger. The woman's choice, still trapped in her chest, would now be tested not only by law or love, but by blood and fire. And in that instant, with the outlaw's pistol flashing, the stranger stepping into the storm, and the raiders surging forward, she knew the climax of her fate had come crashing through the doors with them. The room erupted in chaos, but her decision, though unspoken, burned in her heart like a brand. The storm of men and fire had arrived, and there would be no turning back. The raiders poured into the courthouse like a flood let loose, torches high and rifles gleaming. Their shouts shook the rafters, their boots pounding across the floor as the townsfolk scattered in panic. Firelight danced across the walls, smoke curling into the air. The woman felt her heart hammer in her chest, the heat of the flames already licking against her skin. She had thought her hardest choice was in naming a husband before the judge. But here was the truth. Her choice was survival itself, and the world would not wait. The outlaw's pistol cracked loud and sure, the bullet finding its mark in the first man through the door. He moved like fire, fierce and wild, pushing forward with every shot, daring the raiders to meet him head-on. His smirk had returned, though it was sharper now, edged with danger. The stranger, in contrast, moved with quiet precision. He pulled townsfolk to safety, guided their panic into order, and fired only when he had no other choice. He was not wild, but steady, his every move measured. The woman clutched the edge of a bench as the raiders stormed closer. Her voice caught in her throat, but her mind sharpened. She had been pushed by law, threatened by fear, judged by neighbors, but now the storm forced her hand. She could not stand still while men like wolves closed in. With a surge of defiance, she grabbed the fallen deputy's rifle from the floor. The weight of it in her hand steadied her trembling. The outlaw caught sight of her, his grin widening even as he fired another round. "That's it, girl. Fire back, or be swallowed whole." The stranger's eyes flicked toward her, softer but no less fierce. "Aim true. Don't waste your shot." The raiders closed in, but the woman raised the rifle, her finger steady on the trigger. The recoil jolted her shoulder as the shot rang out and one of the raiders crumpled to the ground. The sound echoed inside her louder than the gunshot itself. She was no longer the girl waiting for others to decide her fate. She was part of the storm, and she would not be broken by it. The battle raged, chaos filling every corner of the courthouse. The outlaw cut a path through the front, fearless and fast, while the stranger stood near her side, protecting those who couldn't protect themselves. The judge cowered beneath his desk, forgotten by all, the gavel lying useless at his feet. The law had no power here. The only law that mattered was survival. Flames spread from the curtains to the wooden beams overhead. Smoke thickened, stinging her eyes, but still she fired again and again until her hands grew numb. The raiders began to falter under the resistance, their voices turning from triumph to frustration. The outlaw laughed through the smoke, his voice carrying even as bullets shattered wood around him. "You thought you'd burn us out, but you'll find the fire cuts both ways." At last the raiders broke. Some fled into the storm, their torches falling into the mud outside. Others lay still, their rifles abandoned. The sound of hooves retreated into the distance, swallowed by the rolling thunder. The courthouse, though scarred by smoke and blood, still stood. And so did she. Silence crept in, broken only by the hiss of dying flames and the ragged breaths of those who had survived. The outlaw slid his pistol back into its holster, his eyes finding hers across the ruined room. The stranger lowered his weapon as well, his gaze steady, quiet. And waiting, the judge crawled out from under his desk, his voice hoarse. "The law. The law will see justice for this." But no one listened. His words rang hollow, stripped of their weight. The townsfolk turned not to him, but to the woman, to the outlaw, and to the stranger. They had seen who stood in the fire and who cowered in its shadow. The woman held the rifle close, her chest heaving. Her choice still waited, though it no longer felt like the decree of a gavel. It was hers now, and she would not let it be taken. She looked at the outlaw, his wild grin daring her to leap into fire beside him. She looked at the stranger, his quiet strength offering something steadier, something that might last beyond the storm. The outlaw stepped closer, his boots crunching on broken glass. "You've got fire in you, girl. I saw it tonight. Ride with me, and you'll never be chained again. The world's wide, and it takes what it wants. Together, we could take it all." His words burned like sparks in her chest. Tempting, dangerous, alive. The stranger moved forward as well, his voice calm, though his eyes held the weight of everything unsaid. "You've seen what happens when the law fails. But survival isn't just fire and bullets. It's building something after the storm. I won't promise you an easy road. I'll promise only that I'll walk it with you, side by side." Her throat tightened. Both men stood before her, their paths pulling in opposite directions, and all eyes were on her once again. But this time, she wasn't the girl trembling at the judge's command. She was the woman who had fired into the storm, who had stood in the fire and not broken. She lifted her chin, her voice steady. No judge will order me again. No law will bind me against my will. I choose because it is mine to choose, not theirs. The outlaw's grin flickered, as though her words cut deeper than bullets. The stranger's eyes softened, a flicker of relief passing through his steady gaze. The townsfolk murmured, some with awe, some with fear, but all with respect. The storm outside began to fade, the rain slowing to a gentle patter. Smoke curled through the broken windows, carrying the scent of earth and ash. The courthouse would need rebuilding, the town would bear scars, but the night had not taken them. The outlaw tipped his hat, his grin returning, though fainter. Maybe you'll ride with me yet, girl. Maybe not. But you've got the fire, and that's more than most. He turned, striding into the storm. His shadow swallowed by the night. The stranger remained, his presence steady beside her. He said nothing more, only stood with her as the townsfolk gathered. Their faces turned not to the judge, not to the law, but to her. The woman lowered the rifle at last, her hands aching, her body trembling with exhaustion. Yet inside, something burned brighter than ever. She had not chosen out of fear, not out of law, but out of strength. And whatever path she walked from here, it would be hers. Morning broke at last, pale light spilling across the horizon. The town stirred with the weight of rebuilding, the ashes of the night still fresh. But in their eyes was something new, something that had not been there before, the knowledge that the storm had not broken them. The woman stepped out into the dawn, a stranger at her side. The fields stretched wide before her, endless and untamed. The outlaw's shadow lingered in her mind, but so did the fire in her chest. Freedom was no longer a promise from another man. It was hers to carry, hers to protect, hers to live. The judge's gavel lay forgotten in the dust, the symbol of a law that no longer held her fate. She had chosen her own, forged not by decree but by fire, and as the sun rose, she felt the world open wide, a horizon waiting to be claimed. Her life, her future, her freedom, of it was hers at last. The storm had passed, but its fire remained, carried within her as a promise she would never again let go.